Settle in then. Let the day fall away from your shoulders, the way a tired cloth might slip from the edge of a table, unhurried, unnoticed, and without ceremony. It is late, or at least it feels late, and the house has finally grown quiet around you. The last light has been turned off somewhere down the hall. The last conversation has ended. The last page of the book you were reading has turned. And now, there is only the sound of whatever small things share your room with you, the hum of a refrigerator somewhere below, the soft ticking of a clock, the occasional rustle of wind against the glass. This is a good hour for stories. Not the loud kind, the kind that makes you sit forward in your chair and grip the armrests. The other kind, the kind that lets you lie back and let your eyes drift half closed. The kind that carries you along like water, patiently, quietly, steadily. And water, as it happens, is where we are going tonight. Not the water of the sea, though the sea is lovely and has its own slow stories to tell. Not the water of a rainstorm, though rain makes a fine lullaby of its own on a dark roof. No, tonight we are going to follow a different sort of water, the kind that the Romans built, the kind that ran through stone channels for miles and miles, crossing valleys on tall arches, threading through hillsides in dark tunnels, descending gently from the mountains toward the great city of Rome, where it arrived not with a roar but with a murmur, flowing into fountains and baths, and the homes of ordinary people who took it all for granted. The Roman aqueducts. Now, before we go any further, let us do what any good late-night story should do. Let us slow down. Let us take a breath. If you are lying down, let your arms rest heavy at your sides. If you are sitting, let your head fall back against whatever supports it. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to remember. The day is done. The year, whatever year it is, can wait. And we have all the time in the world to walk, very slowly, through the water channels of ancient Rome. In fact, walking is not quite the right word for what we are about to do, because the people we are going to meet tonight did not walk through the aqueducts. They crawled. Let me explain. By the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Roman Empire, the city of Rome had grown into something enormous, something that astonished every visitor who arrived from the provinces. It was a city of perhaps 1 million people, which in the ancient world was almost unimaginable. 1 million people need 1 million things. They need food, which arrived by ship and by cart. They need shelter, which rose in crowded apartment blocks stacked several stories high. And they need water, clean, fresh, reliable water for drinking, for cooking, for bathing, for washing clothes, for the fountains that kept the streets from becoming unbearable, for the great public baths, where senators and slaves alike soaked away the heat of the afternoon. And they needed a lot of it, not just a little, a staggering amount, an amount measured not in buckets or jugs, but in the millions of gallons every single day. To meet this endless, insatiable thirst, the Romans built something that had never been attempted on such a scale anywhere else in the world. They built a system of aqueducts, channels, conduits, and pipes that brought water from springs in the hills, some of them many miles away, down into the heart of the city, The word aqueduct comes from the Latin aqua, meaning water, and ductus, meaning a leading or a conduit, a leading of water. And that is exactly what it was. A long, patient, engineered leading of water from where it naturally emerged from the earth to where people needed it to go. By the end of the 1st century, Rome had 9 major aqueducts feeding the city. Eventually, there would be 11. They ran for hundreds of miles in total, sometimes crossing the countryside on rows of graceful arches that still stand today in broken sections, some of them looking like the ribcage of some ancient beast sleeping in the grass. But here is something worth considering. Building an aqueduct is one thing. Making it work for 100 years, 200 years, is another thing entirely. Water is not a cooperative passenger. Water carries minerals. Water deposits sediment. Water encourages the growth of moss and algae, and in some places, something like a thin, crusty stone that clings to the walls and slowly, year by year, narrows the channel. Water also leaks. Water seeps through cracks in the masonry. Water loosens the mortar that holds the stones together. And water, left to its own devices, will always, eventually, find a way to stop doing what you want it to do. So the Romans, who were nothing if not practical, had to maintain their aqueducts. And that meant someone had to go inside them. Not some modern inspector with a flashlight and a hard hat and a comfortable pair of boots. No, the Roman inspectors, most of them slaves, some of them freedmen, occasionally a hired worker or two, went into the channels with nothing more than a small oil lamp, a little clothing, and if they were lucky, a scratchy tunic that might offer the smallest protection against the cold, wet stone. And they crawled. You see, the aqueduct channels were not built for people. They were built for water. And water does not need headroom. Water does not need to stand up straight. Water is perfectly happy to travel through a passage that is only 3 feet high, or 2.5 feet high, or sometimes even less. The water slides along the bottom of the channel, between walls of stone, beneath a roof of stone slabs, moving at a gentle, steady pace, carrying with it whatever the springs and the hills and the long miles have given it. So when an inspector needed to check the condition of the channel, he had to become as low and as patient as the water itself. He had to get down on his hands and knees. And then, if the channel was especially tight, he had to flatten himself further, pressing his belly against the cold, wet floor, feeling the water rush past his body, inches from his face, while his lamp flickered in the darkness ahead. Imagine, if you will, what that was like. You are in a tunnel. The entrance was a small opening in the ground, perhaps a stone shaft built for maintenance access, set into the hillside where the aqueduct passes through a ridge. You lower yourself down. There are footholds, shallow niches cut into the stone, worn smooth by generations of hands and feet before yours. The air changes as you descend. It becomes cooler, damper, heavier. There is a smell not unpleasant, but strange, the smell of wet rock and mineral water, and something faintly earthy, like the inside of a deep cave. At the bottom of the shaft, there is a small chamber. And in the wall of that chamber, there is a dark opening, the floor of the channel, the beginning of your journey. You are not a tall person. Few Roman slaves were tall, and the work of inspecting aqueducts was reserved for those who were slender, small-boned, and agile. Even so, the channel is tight. You crouch. You duck your head under the lip of the opening. And then, with your oil lamp held low, just above the surface of the water, you begin to move forward. The water is cold. It reaches your knees at first, then your shins as the channel floor evens out. It is moving at perhaps 2 or 3 miles an hour, which is not fast, but it presses against you constantly. A steady, gentle push toward the city, toward the distant fountains and baths. You brace one hand on the wall to your left, the other hand holding the lamp. The stone walls are rough under your fingers, but not sharp. They have been smoothed by centuries of water, polished into a kind of soft, damp velvet. The roof is so low that you cannot raise your head. If you try, your back bumps against the stone slabs above, and you immediately lower yourself again. You are grateful for the tunic you are wearing, and you are equally grateful that it is short, because the water reaches your waist in the deeper places, and a longer garment would only drag and chill you further. And the darkness. We should talk about the darkness, because there is nothing like it in the modern world. The darkness inside an aqueduct channel is not the darkness of a room with the lights off. It is not the darkness of a city street at night, with distant glows bleeding in from streetlights. It is a deep, absolute, ancient darkness. The kind of darkness that has never seen the sun. The only light in the entire world, for you, right now, is the small flame of your oil lamp, and it casts a tiny circle of warm, yellow glow around you, just enough to see the water at your feet, the walls at your sides, and the low ceiling above your head. Beyond that circle, there is nothing. The tunnel simply ends in blackness, ahead of you and behind you. A blackness so complete that it is almost a physical presence, like a soft cloth over your eyes. And so you crawl. You crawl because you must. Because the channel is too low to walk in. Because the floor is slippery in some places and gritty in others. Because the water flows around your knees and your hands, so cold that after a while you stop feeling it, and your fingers become numb and pale. You crawl for 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet. The tunnel does not change. The walls are the same. The ceiling is the same. The water is the same. The darkness is the same. The only thing that changes is the sound, the gentle splash of your movements, the soft echo of your breathing, the occasional drip of water somewhere far ahead, where a crack in the roof lets a single drop fall from who knows how high above, from the world of sunlight and trees and birds, a world that seems impossibly distant now. Why are you doing this? Why would anyone do this? Because the aqueduct must deliver water. Because the people of Rome are waiting for it. Because if the channel is blocked, or broken, or leaking, the fountains will run dry, the baths will go cold, and the city will suffer. And because you, the inspector, are the one who has been sent to find out what is wrong. This was not a glamorous job. There was no prestige in it, no honor, no comfortable office in the imperial palace. The men who crawled through the aqueducts were at the very bottom of Roman society. They were slaves, owned by the state, or freedmen, former slaves who had earned their liberty, but still worked in the same trades they had practiced before. They were anonymous. We do not know their names. We do not know their faces. We do not know how many of them there were, or how often they were sent into the channels. But we know that they existed because we have the writings of a man who supervised them. His name was Sextus Julius Frontinus, and he is the closest thing we have to a guide for tonight's story. Frontinus was a Roman senator, a former governor, a man of considerable talent and education. Late in the 1st century, around the year 97, the Emperor Nerva appointed him to a very specific post, Curator Aquarum, the commissioner of the water supply, the man in charge of all of Rome's aqueducts. It was a serious job, a position of great responsibility, and Frontinus took it very seriously indeed. He wrote a book about it, a detailed manual called De Aqueductu, in which he set down everything about the aqueducts, their history, their capacity, their problems, and the methods used to maintain them. And in that book, he tells us about the inspectors. He calls them, in his precise, administrative Latin, the ones who were sent to examine the channels. He describes them as being small because they had to fit into the narrow passages. He mentions that they wore little clothing because the channels were too tight for bulky garments. He notes that they went into the darkness, into the cold water, to check the condition of the vaults above them and the walls beside them, to feel for cracks with their bare hands, to scrape away deposits of mineral scale, to clear away the debris that had washed in from the outside tree roots that had forced their way through the stones, gravel that had been swept in by rainstorms, the occasional dead animal that had fallen into an uncovered shaft and been carried along by the current until it wedged against a wall. We should stop for a moment and appreciate something about Frontinus. He was not a poet. He did not write in the flowery, exaggerated style that so many Roman authors loved. His book is practical, dry, almost bureaucratic. He gives numbers. He gives measurements. He gives lists of who was responsible for what. And yet, if you read him carefully, with a slow and patient eye, you can see the people behind the numbers. You can see the inspector, crouched in the dark, running his fingers over the stone. You can see the water, cold and relentless, moving past him toward the city. You can see the small flame of the lamp and the shadows it casts on the curved ceiling above. Frontinus was not only a bureaucrat, he was also, in his own quiet way, an enthusiast. He was fascinated by the engineering of the aqueducts, by the skill of the surveyors who had laid them out across the landscape, by the patience of the masons who had built them. He understood that the aqueducts were a miracle, not a miracle in the religious sense, but a miracle of human persistence. He wrote that the aqueducts bore witness to the greatness of the Roman Empire, and that they were more impressive than the pyramids of Egypt, because the pyramids were built for display, but the aqueducts were built for life. And now we get to a curious detail, a detail that might make you smile, or might make you shake your head, or might simply make you feel a sleepy kind of wonder at how very strange and very practical the Romans really were, in order to ensure that the aqueducts were maintained properly and that the inspectors actually did their jobs. Frontinus organized the workforce into teams. There were the main workforce, the aquarii, the water keepers, who were stationed at various points along the aqueducts. And there were the specialist teams, the men who repaired the masonry, the men who cleared the channels, the men who patrolled the arcades. And there were, of course, the inspectors themselves, who went out to check the condition of the channels whenever a problem was reported or whenever a routine inspection was due. But how do you know that an inspector has really crawled through the channel? How do you know that he has not simply crept a little way inside, sat down in the dark, and then come back out, reporting that everything is fine? This is a very human concern. Any manager in any era has wondered the same thing about their employees. And the Romans, being the Romans, came up with a solution. The inspectors did not go alone. They went in pairs. Each man was the witness of the other, and each man was responsible for the other. If one of them reported that the channel was clear, his companion could confirm it. If one of them drowned or fell or simply disappeared into the darkness, his companion could raise the alarm. It was a system of mutual watchfulness, a kind of ancient buddy system, born out of the practical need for safety and the equally practical need for honesty. But even that, apparently, was not enough, because Frontinus, in his careful, methodical way, tells us something else. He tells us that the inspectors were required, when they entered a channel, to carry with them not only a lamp, but also a series of small tokens, bits of lead or stamped discs, perhaps, and that they were required to drop one of these tokens at each inspection point along the way. When they emerged at the other end, they would present the remaining tokens, and their count and their position would be matched against the points they had been expected to pass. Think about that for a moment. A small lead token, stamped with the name of the aqueduct or the number of the inspection point, falling into the cold water with a faint plink, and then being carried away by the current, or settling into the mineral deposits on the floor, where it might lie for 2,000 years, waiting for some future archaeologist to find it. The inspector, bent double in the darkness, would reach into his pouch, pull out a token, and drop it at the exact measured spot. Then he would continue deeper into the blackness, his lamp flickering, his wet feet slipping on the stone. The tokens were, in a way, proof that the work had been done, proof that someone had been there in the dark, in the water, doing the job that no one else wanted to do. And they were also, in another way, a small act of hope, a way of saying, I am here. I am passing through. I am doing my part. We do not know if the inspectors resented their work. We do not know if they feared it. The sources are silent on their feelings, but we can imagine. We can imagine a young man, a slave, perhaps born in the household of the aqueducts, raised among the water keepers and the masons. He has grown up hearing stories about the channels, about the places where the current is dangerously fast, where the roof dips so low that you must press your face into the water to pass pass beneath it, where the darkness feels so heavy that some men swear they can hear voices in it. And yet, he goes, because he must, because the work needs to be done, because there is bread to be earned and status to be gained, and maybe, if he is fortunate, his freedom to be won by years of faithful service. There is a strange beauty to this, a beauty that is hard to describe without sounding sentimental. But if you have ever lain awake at night, thinking about the vast machinery of civilization, about all the invisible work that keeps the world running, then you already know what I am talking about. The light in your room, the water in your pipes, the food in your kitchen. None of it appears by magic. All of it requires someone somewhere to crawl through a dark channel, so to speak, and check that everything is in order. The Romans understood this better than most. They built their aqueducts with care, and they maintained them with even more care, because they knew that the aqueducts were not monuments to be admired, but systems to be used. And systems fail if they are not tended. Let us think for a while about the physical experience of the aqueduct itself, because the aqueducts that survive today are so often just broken arches, romantic ruins in the countryside, and it is easy to forget that they were once full of water, alive with motion, singing with sound. An aqueduct was never a simple pipe. It was a carefully engineered channel, usually made of stone and concrete, with a gentle, continuous downward slope. The slope was the whole secret. The Romans did not use pumps to move the water. They did not use pressure, except in the last few miles, where the water was delivered through lead pipes to individual buildings. The aqueducts themselves worked by gravity alone. The water came from a spring in the hills, where the elevation was high, and it flowed downhill very gradually, very evenly, all the way to Rome. The incline was so gentle that you would hardly notice it. Over the course of a mile, the channel might drop only a few feet, but that was enough to keep the water moving, enough to bring millions of gallons to the city every day. The channel itself was shaped like a rectangle, wider than it was tall. The floor was lined with a special material, often a kind of water-resistant plaster, to prevent the water from seeping into the ground. The walls were built of stone or concrete, and the roof was covered with slabs of stone or tiles, sometimes sealed with more plaster. In places where the aqueduct crossed a valley, it was carried on a series of arches, sometimes 2 or 3 stories high. In places where it had to pass through a hill, the Romans cut a tunnel straight through the rock, with shafts sunk from above at regular intervals to allow access for construction and maintenance. Those shafts are important. They are the doors to our story. They are how the inspectors got in and out. And they are also, in a way, points of light in the darkness, places where, if you were standing at the bottom of the tunnel, you could look up and see a small, distant circle of blue sky, and feel for just a moment the warmth of the sun on your face before you turned back to the water and the darkness again. When a new aqueduct was built, the maintenance shafts were planned from the very beginning. They were set at intervals of perhaps several hundred feet, each one a vertical shaft leading down from the surface to the bottom of the channel. The shafts were covered with stone slabs or wooden lids to keep out debris and unauthorized intruders. But when an inspector needed to enter the channel, his team would lift the covering and he would descend. Descending a shaft was an adventure. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. The walls were rough, cut through the natural rock or lined with bricks. There were footholds, small niches cut into the walls, or in some cases, a series of iron rings set into the stone. Down and down and down. The light from above grew smaller and smaller, a shrinking circle of white. The air grew colder and damper. The sounds from the world above, birdsong, wind, the distant barking of a dog faded away until they were replaced by the hollow echo of your own breath and the faint, musical sound of water moving below you. And then you reached the bottom. A small chamber, perhaps 4 feet square, with the channel opening on one side, the water sliding past, black and smooth, reflecting the flicker of your lamp. You checked your equipment. Your oil lamp, filled with olive oil, trimmed and ready. Small cloth bag, slung over your shoulder, containing the lead tokens for the inspection points. A knife, perhaps, for cutting away roots and vegetation. Nothing else. No lunch, no water flask, no change of clothes. The Romans were practical, but they were not generous with supplies. You were expected to complete your inspection efficiently and emerge at the next shaft, where your colleagues would be waiting to haul you up. Inside, there was no real speed. You moved at the speed of the water, which is to say, slowly. You could not rush, because rushing meant slipping, falling, losing your lamp, dropping your tokens. You could not straighten your back, because the roof was too low. You could not see much, because the light was so small. So you moved on your hands and knees, and sometimes, in the tightest sections, on your belly, with your cheek so close to the water that you could feel the mist of it on your face. The water itself was clean. That is important to remember. The aqueducts carried fresh spring water, not sewage. The Romans had a separate system for waste, the famous Cloaca Maxima, the great drain, which ran beneath the streets of the city. The aqueduct water was pure, cold, and sweet. And so, when an inspector got thirsty, he could simply bend down and drink from the channel that he was inspecting. This was, perhaps, one of the few comforts of the job. In the bleak, wet, dark interior of the aqueduct, at least the water was good. But purity was not guaranteed. This was, strangely, one of the major problems that the inspectors had to deal with. The aqueducts could be polluted, not accidentally, but deliberately. People tapped into them. Not the official legal taps, which were regulated and taxed, but illegal, secret taps. A homeowner whose property lay near an aqueduct might break into the channel at night, install a pipe, and steal water for his own private use. The theft of water was a serious crime in Rome, and Frontinus devoted a large portion of his book to the problem. How did the inspectors find these illegal taps? By crawling through the channels, by looking at the walls, by feeling for the telltale signs of recent masonry, the edges of a cut that had been patched over, the presence of a pipe leading out through the wall. was slow, meticulous work that required patience and attention to detail. An inspector could not simply glance at a wall. He had to examine it, foot by foot, hand over the surface, looking for something that did not belong. And then there was the problem of limescale. If you have ever lived in a place with hard water, you know what limescale looks like: the white, crusty deposits that build up inside pipes and kettles. The aqueducts suffered from the same problem, on a much larger scale. As the water flowed through the channels, it deposited minerals on the walls and the floor. Over years and decades, these deposits could build up so thickly that the channel narrowed, reducing the flow of water. In extreme cases, the deposits could almost completely block the aqueduct. The inspectors had to measure the buildup to see how thick it was and to determine when it needed to be removed. They did this by touch, by sight, by comparing the current condition of the channel to what they remembered from previous inspections. And when the buildup became too severe, the aqueduct was drained and the deposits were chipped away by hand, by gangs of workers with hammers and chisels, working in the same cramped, dark conditions as the inspectors themselves. Roots were another problem. An aqueduct that ran near trees could suffer from roots penetrating the joints between the stones, working their way into the channel and growing into dense tangles that trapped debris and slowed the water. The roots had to be cut away, pulled out, and the joints had to be repaired. This was often done from inside the channel, in the dark, by a man with a knife and a small lamp, hacking at the stubborn, woody tendrils while the cold water ran over his hands. And then there were the leaks. A leak could be subtle, a small, damp patch on the outer wall of the aqueduct, noticeable only to an inspector who knew what to look for. Or it could be catastrophic, a section of the channel that had collapsed entirely, sending water pouring out into the countryside. The collapses were caused by floods, by landslides, by earthquakes, or simply by the slow wearing away of the structure over time. When a collapse happened, the aqueduct had to be shut down, drained, and rebuilt. The inspectors were the first to know, because they were inside when it happened. Let us pause here in our story, because it is a good place to pause. We have been crawling along with our imaginary inspector for what feels like a long time. We have felt the cold water around our knees. We have seen the flickering lamp and the shadows on the curved stone ceiling. We have run our fingers over the rough walls, looking for cracks and leaks. And we have understood, perhaps for the first time, how much work it took to keep the water flowing. But there is more to the story. There is always more. And when we are sleepy and the night is soft around us, we can let the story drift on a little longer. Let us talk about Frontinus himself. He has been waiting in the background, but he deserves our attention now. Sextus Julius Frontinus was, by the standards of his time, a very successful man. He had served as governor of Britain, where he had subdued the warlike tribe of the Silures and brought peace to the province. He had written books on military strategy and on land surveying. He was a member of the Senate, a friend of emperors, a man of wealth and reputation. And then, in his later years, he was given the post of curator aquarum, And he did something that no previous holder of the office had done. He wrote a book about it. The book is not long. It is not dramatic. It is, as we said earlier, almost bureaucratic. But it is also, in its own quiet way, one of the most beautiful books to survive from the ancient world, because it is a book about care. Care for the water, care for the system, care for the people who depended on it, care for the men who maintained it. Frontinus describes the aqueducts with the affection of a man who has spent years studying them. He lists their lengths, their capacities, their origins. He tells us which springs feed which aqueduct, and how the water is distributed to the various neighborhoods of the city. He tells us about the fountains, the baths, the public buildings, the private homes, and how much water each one receives. He is not satisfied with vague descriptions. He wants numbers. He wants precision. And so he gives us numbers and precision. But every so often, a different voice slips through. A voice of wonder. He writes about how the water, after all its long journey from the mountains, arrives in the city so pure and so clear that it is a pleasure to drink. He writes about the great fountains where the water leaps and sparkles and catches the light of the sun. He writes about the importance of keeping the channels free from obstructions so that the water can flow as freely as it did when it first left the earth at its source. And he writes about the men who do the work. He mentions the gangs of slaves, organized by skill and function, the aquarii who attended to the water, the castellani who managed the distribution tanks, the so-called casella, where the water was divided among different pipes, the silicarii who repaired the stonework, the tectors who plastered the walls, the circulators, the patrollers who walked along the aqueduct routes, watching for damage and theft, and the inspectors, the ones who went inside, the ones who crawled. Frontinus does not romanticize them. He does not turn them into heroes. He treats them with the same practical, administrative eye that he gives to everything else. They are labor to be managed, tasked, and supervised. And yet, we know that he relied on them. We know that without their willingness to descend into the darkness, the entire system would have failed. And we know that he trusted them enough to send them, again and again, into the cramped, cold, dangerous interior of the channels. There is a passage in his book where he describes an inspection of an aqueduct that has been narrowed by lime scale. He gives the measurements, the original width of the channel, the current width after years of buildup. He calculates how much water is being lost. Then he orders the channel to be drained and the scale to be removed. And he notes, with what can only be read as satisfaction, that after the work was done, the aqueduct was able to deliver significantly more water than it had before. Underneath the dry administrative language, you can sense something like pride. The pride of a man who knows that his system is working, that his decisions are sound, that his inspectors have done their jobs. The pride of a man who has crawled, perhaps not physically, but intellectually, through every mile of the channels, and who knows them as well as he knows his own name. Frontinus was not a builder. He did not design the aqueducts. He inherited them. But he did something perhaps even more important. He preserved them. He maintained them. He kept them working. And in doing so, he kept 1,000,000 people supplied with the most essential resource of all. Now, let us return to the channel. Let us go back to our inspector, alone in the dark. He has been crawling for perhaps an hour. He has passed several inspection points, dropping his tokens as required. He is wet to the waist. His knees are sore. His hands are numb. The lamp is still burning, but the oil is running low, and he knows that he must soon reach the next shaft, or he will be in trouble. And yet, he does not hurry. He has learned from experience that hurrying in the channels is the worst thing you can do. The floor is uneven in places, the water deeper in some spots than in others. There are also, periodically, the places where the channel narrows suddenly, where the walls press in around you like a gentle but insistent hand, and you must squeeze through, turning your head sideways, holding your breath, feeling the water rise to your chest as you push through. These constrictions were deliberate. The Romans built them in some aqueducts as settling basins, places where the water slowed down enough to drop the sediment it was carrying. The sediment would accumulate at the bottom of these basins, where it could be removed by the maintenance workers. For the inspector, however, they were simply another obstacle, another test of patience. He reaches a settling basin. He feels the walls widen around him. The water is deeper here, still and dark, and the sound changes, becoming more resonant. He stops for a moment, crouching in the gloom, and he listens. He has been listening all along without really thinking about it. The water makes its own music, a low, continuous murmur against the stones. There is also the occasional drip, the soft plink of a droplet falling from the roof, and there are other sounds, harder to identify. A creak as the structure settles somewhere far above. A distant rumble, perhaps the sound of a cart passing on the road outside. And once, maybe, a sound that might be a voice, a human voice, faint and far away, carried through the shafts from the world above. He wonders who it is. Another worker at his own shaft, perhaps, or a traveler on the road, someone with no idea that beneath his feet, in the hidden dark, a man is crawling through water to keep the city alive. This thought, and we should stay with it, because it is one of those strange, lovely thoughts that appears in the small hours of the night. This thought connects him to something. He is not alone. Even though he cannot see the sky, cannot feel the sun, cannot hear the birds, he is connected to a vast web of work and purpose. The aqueduct runs through him, and he runs through it. He is part of the machine, and the machine is part of the city, and the city is part of the empire, and the empire is part of history. His lamp flickers, the flame shrinks, and for a moment he feels a cold knot of fear in his stomach. But then he reaches into his tunic and pulls out a small flask of oil, and he refills the lamp, carefully, patiently, the way he has done 100 times before. The flame steadies. It grows, and he continues. Ahead of him, the tunnel curves slightly, and in the curve, he finds something unexpected. A pile of debris wedged against the wall. It looks like a tangle of roots mixed with gravel and sand, the kind of thing that washes in through the shafts during a heavy rain. He can see in the lamplight that the water is backing up behind the debris, rising against the wall, forming a small pool. If it is not cleared, the obstruction will grow, and the water will back up further, and eventually the channel will overflow, and the aqueduct will be damaged. He stops. He considers. He has a knife, and he has time. There is no room for anyone else to help him. The work must be done now by him in the dark, in the cold. He crouches low. The ceiling presses down on him, so he leans forward, almost lying on his side in the water. He pulls out his knife, and he begins to cut at the roots. It is slow work. The roots are tough, old, and the water makes them slippery. He cuts and pulls, and little by little, the debris comes away. The water moves through the clear space he has made, faster now, with a hungry sound, and he feels the current tugging at him, as if the aqueduct itself is eager to be free. And then, at last, the obstruction is gone. He sits back, breathing heavily, his hands cold and raw. The water is flowing smoothly again. The pool has drained. The channel is clear. This is the work. It is not glorious. It is not celebrated. No statue will be erected in his honor. No poem will be written about his name, but the water will flow, and the fountains will splash, and the people of Rome will drink. And all of that will happen because, on an ordinary day, in an ordinary shaft, a man whose name we will never know did the job that needed to be done. He picks up his lamp. He continues. The next shaft is close now. He can feel it, a change in the air, a faint draft from above, and the darkness ahead of him is no longer quite so complete. There's a glimmer, the tiniest hint of light, far away, where the shaft opens to the sky. He moves toward it, and the light grows, and the tunnel becomes slightly brighter, and he can see his own hands in front of his face, white and wrinkled from the water. He reaches the shaft. He looks up. The circle of sky above is pale blue, and there is a cloud in it, and the edge of the cloud is bright with the sun. He can hear the wind high above. He can hear, faintly, the sound of someone calling his name. He is tired. He is cold. He is wet. But he has reached the end of his section, and his work is done. He puts his hands on the footholds and begins to climb. He climbs, hand over hand, and the footholds are slick with moisture, but he knows them by heart. He knows the way the stone feels under his fingers, the way the air changes as he rises, the way the sound of his own breathing grows louder in the enclosed space, and then, suddenly, softer as he emerges into the open air. He pushes aside the wooden cover, a heavy square of oak bound with iron, and he feels the sunlight on his face, and he blinks, and he breathes. The world above is so bright that it seems unreal. He stands at the edge of the shaft, steadying himself, and he looks out across the countryside. The grass is green. The sky is a soft, hazy blue, the kind of blue you see in the late afternoon when the sun has begun its slow descent. There are sheep in the distance, grazing on a hillside, and a shepherd leaning on his staff, and a dog lying in the shade of an olive tree. It is so ordinary, so peaceful, that the dark world he has just left feels like a dream. He leaves the cover open. He will return to close it later, Or perhaps another worker will come and close it, following the usual routine. There is a small stone hut nearby where the maintenance tools are kept, and he walks toward it, his wet sandals squelching on the grass. The sun feels warm on his shoulders, and he is glad of it. He is tired, but it is a good tiredness, the tiredness of a day's work done properly. His colleague is waiting for him at the hut, a man named Marcus, or Gaius, or perhaps Lucius. The names are lost to us, but the shape of the exchange is not. Marcus hands him a dry tunic and a piece of bread and a cup of watered wine. They sit on the low wall outside the hut, and the inspector eats, and he tells Marcus what he found in the channel: the debris, the roots, the pool that had formed. He tells him that he cleared it, that the water is flowing well again, that he dropped his tokens at every inspection point as required. Marcus nods. He is not surprised. This is the work. This is what they do. They sit for a while in the quiet. The sheep move slowly across the hillside. The dog barks once at nothing. The inspector looks at his hands. They are white and wrinkled, like the hands of someone who has been in a bath too long. The skin on his knuckles is raw from the work with the knife. He flexes his fingers and feels the ache, but it is another good ache, the ache of effort, the ache of accomplishment. He thinks about the channel below him, running dark and cold through the earth, carrying its burden of water to the city. He thinks about the millions of gallons that will pass through the place where he crouched, the place where the roots had wedged and the pool had formed. He thinks about how, if he had not cleared it, the flow would have slowed, and the city would have been a little thirstier, a little less comfortable, and nobody would have known why. He finishes his bread. He drinks the wine. The sun is lower now, the shadows longer. He will walk back to the city soon, along the line of the aqueduct, past the other shafts, past the settling basins, past the places where he has spent so many hours of his life. But first he sits and he rests, and he lets the quiet settle around him. And this is where we should leave him for a moment. Not forever, but for a moment. Because there is another story to tell, another thread to follow before we return to his side. The story of the water itself. Follow the water now. Follow it as it flows through the channel he has just cleaned, moving at a steady pace, unhurried, unceasing. The water has been journeying for a long time. It began in the mountains, perhaps, in a spring that bubbled up from the limestone, cold and pure. It was gathered in a catch basin, a stone pool built by the engineers. And from there, it entered the aqueduct, beginning its long walk to the city. The water does not know where it is going. It does not know about the city, about the fountains and the baths, and the houses and the gardens. It does not know about the people who will drink it, who will cook with it, who will wash their clothes in it, who will pour it over their hands before a meal. It is only water, and it follows the path that has been carved for it, flowing downhill, always downhill, seeking its own level, moving through the dark with a patience that is ancient and complete. The aqueduct that carries this particular water is one of the great ones, the Aqua Claudia, begun by the Emperor Caligula and completed by his successor Claudius. The inscription above the great arches still survives, and it tells us the names of the emperors and the distances and the sources. But the inscription does not tell us about the water itself. It does not tell us about the way the water moves through the Specus, the enclosed channel that runs along the top of the arches, just wide enough for a man to crawl through, just tall enough for a man to crouch in. It does not tell us about the places where the channel runs underground, through the hills, in the deep, cool darkness, where the inspectors crawl, and where the work of maintenance is done. The water does not care about the inscriptions. It only cares about the gradient, and the gradient has been carefully calculated, measured, and set. The Romans were masters of the gentle slope. They knew that water, left to itself, would find its own course. But they also knew that they could guide it, coax it, persuade it to travel 100 kilometers or more, crossing valleys on arches, tunneling through mountains, skirting the edges of hills, always descending, but only very slowly. The gradient of the Claudia was about 2.5 meters per kilometer, which means that for every 1,000 meters the water traveled, it dropped only 2.5 meters. A person walking alongside the aqueduct would not notice the slope at all. It would seem perfectly level, perfectly flat. But the water felt it. The water knew. It flowed, steady, and even, never rushing, never halting, a constant stream of life for the city. And all along that journey, there were the inspectors. They were the guardians of the gradient. They were the ones who made sure that the channel remained clear, that the walls did not crack, that the water did not slow or pool or escape. They were the ones who crawled through the dark, feeling their way along the stone, checking the flow, checking the lime scale, checking the joints, checking everything, because no one else could do it. No one else could fit. No one else had the knowledge, the patience, the courage. Let us think about that word, courage. It is a strange word to use for a man crawling through a water channel. There is no enemy here, no army, no danger of combat. The dangers of the channel are quieter, more intimate. There is the danger of the dark, of course, the primal fear of being lost in a place where you cannot see your own hand. There is the danger of the water itself, which can rise without warning if a storm breaks in the hills and flood the channel with a surge of muddy, violent water. There is the danger of the roof, which can collapse, which sometimes did, and the danger of the walls, which can shift, and the danger of the air, which can grow thin in the deepest sections, where the ventilation is poor. And there is the danger of being alone. That is perhaps the greatest danger of all. The inspector crawls through the channel by himself. There is no one with him, no one to call out to, no one to help if something goes wrong. He carries his lamp, his knife, his tokens, his flask of oil, and that is all. He is a single human being, small and fragile, inside the body of an enormous structure that was built to carry something far larger than any person. But courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision, made again and again, to continue despite the fear. And the inspector made that decision every time he descended into a shaft. Every time. Even when he was tired. Even when he was cold. even when he was afraid. He did it because it was his job, and because he knew that the aqueduct needed him, and because he knew that the water had to flow. There is a kind of nobility in that, a quiet, unassuming nobility, the kind that does not appear in the histories, the kind that is not celebrated in song or marble. It is the nobility of the person who does the work that no one else wants to do, the work that everyone relies on, the work that keeps the world running, and who does it without complaint, without ceremony, without any expectation of reward. We have lost something of that in our own time, perhaps. We have lost the sense of being part of something larger than ourselves. The inspector knew, with absolute certainty, that he was part of something larger. He was part of the aqueduct. The aqueduct was part of the city. The city was part of the empire. And the empire, for all its flaws and all its violence, was also a kind of gift, a structure that carried water and law and order and peace to millions of people. The inspector could not have articulated all of this, perhaps. He probably did not think about it in such grand terms. He thought about the roots, the debris, the lime scale, the flow of the water. But he felt it in his bones. He felt the meaning of his work, even if he could not have put it into words. Now the sun is setting. The inspector has finished his bread and wine. He stands up, stretches, and looks again at the shaft, still open, still dark. He will close it before he leaves. He always does. It is part of the routine, the final act of the work, the sealing of the hidden world, so that the visible world can continue, undisturbed, above. He walks to the shaft and kneels. He looks down into the darkness, and he hears the water below, a faint, continuous sound, like the sound of a distant river. It is the sound of life, the sound of the city being sustained, the sound of the empire being fed. He listens for a moment, and then he lifts the wooden cover and sets it in place. The sound is muted now, reduced to a whisper. He stands up, brushes the dust from his hands, and begins the walk home. Let us follow him for a little while. The road is quiet, lined with cypress and stone pines. The air is cool, the light soft and golden. In the distance, he can see the city, spread across its hills, its roofs and monuments catching the last of the sun. He has walked this road many times in the evening after his work is done. He knows its every curve, its every stone. He knows the places where the road crosses the arches of the aqueduct, where he can look up and see the water moving, glinting, in the open sections where the channel is uncovered. He is thinking about the water. He is always thinking about the water, even when he is not thinking about it. It is a constant presence in his mind, like a tune that he cannot quite shake, a rhythm that has become part of his own heartbeat. He dreams about it at night sometimes. He dreams of walking through a great dark tunnel, and the water is all around him, and he is not afraid. In the dream, the tunnel goes on forever, and he walks and walks, and the water sings to him, and he understands it, somehow, the way you understand things in dreams, and it feels like coming home. He reaches the edge of the city. The road becomes a street, lined with houses and shops. The evening bustle is beginning. People are coming out of their homes, going to the baths, going to the taverns, buying bread for the evening meal. The smell of cooking oil and wood smoke drifts through the air. A dog barks somewhere. A child laughs. The inspector walks through the streets, unnoticed, unremarkable, one more working man returning home. He passes a fountain. It is one of the many public fountains that dot the city, supplied by the very aqueduct he has spent the day in. Water spills from a bronze pipe into a stone basin, overflowing into a drain. It is a simple thing, a constant stream of clean water, available to anyone who wants it. A woman is filling a jug. A boy is drinking from his cupped hands. A man is washing his face, splashing the water over his head and shoulders, letting it run down his neck. The inspector stops. He watches. He has seen this 1,000 times, but tonight, perhaps because he is tired, perhaps because his muscles ache, perhaps because the day has been long and the dark was deep, he sees it differently. He sees the water as a gift. He sees the woman with her jug, the boy with his cupped hands, the man with his wet face. He sees all of them connected to the dark channel he crawled through, connected to the veins and arteries of the city, connected to the mountains far away, where the water began its journey. He does not say anything. He does not need to say anything. He walks on. And now, let us return to the beginning. Let us return to the surface of the water, to the history of the aqueducts, to the story of how they were built and maintained. We have been in the dark with the inspector for a long time, and we have seen his world from the inside. Now let us see it from the outside. Let us see it as the emperor saw it, as the engineers saw it, as the people of Rome saw it. Let us see it as a miracle of stone and water, a miracle made by human hands. The first aqueducts were built in the 4th century before the Common Era, in the early days of the Republic. Appius Claudius Caecus, the censor, gave his name to the first one, the Appia, which ran for about 16 kilometers from the springs near Praenest to the city. It was a remarkable achievement, but it was also a modest one compared to what came later. The Appia ran mostly underground, following the contours of the land, avoiding the need for arches. It was a channel of stone, probably, though later repairs and rebuildings have obscured the original construction. The point is that the Romans learned. They learned by doing, by making mistakes, by fixing them. They learned that water, if left to itself, would find the lowest point, but if guided, could be persuaded to go almost anywhere. They learned how to measure the slope, how to level the channel, how to build the arches that carried the water across valleys. They learned how to tunnel through mountains, cutting through the rock with hammer and chisel, following the light of lamps, venturing deep into the earth. And they learned how to maintain it all, how to keep the water flowing, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. By the time of the empire, Rome had 11 aqueducts, carrying more than 1 million gallons of water a day from springs and rivers within a radius of nearly 100 kilometers. The total length of the aqueducts was more than 400 kilometers, of which about 50 kilometers were carried on arches. The greatest of them all, the Aqua Claudia, ran for nearly 70 kilometers over arches and through tunnels, and it was said to be the finest water in Rome, cool and clear and pure. The water did not flow directly from the aqueducts into the fountains. It first entered a distribution tank called a Castellum Aquae, a small building with a vaulted roof where the water pooled and settled, and from which it was distributed through lead pipes to the various neighborhoods. The Castellum was the heart of the network, the place where the water was divided, measured, and sent on its way. It was managed by a staff of workers, the Aquarii, who were organized in a hierarchy, from the procurator in charge of the whole system down to the lowliest laborer who cleaned the pipes. Frontinus, the man we spoke of earlier, was the procurator aquarum, the official in charge of all the aqueducts. He wrote a report, the De Aqueductu, in which he described in detail the condition of the aqueducts, the amounts of water they carried, the problems they faced, and the measures he took to fix them. His report is remarkable for its detail, its honesty, its practical wisdom. It is also remarkable for its tone, which is calm, methodical, and deeply committed to the public good. Frontinus was not a romantic. He did not see the aqueducts as monuments or symbols. He saw them as infrastructure, as systems, as machines that needed to be kept in good working order. He worried about leaks, about theft, about the illegal tapping of the water supply by private citizens who wanted more than their fair share. He worried about the contractors who built the aqueducts, who sometimes cut corners, using cheaper materials than the specifications required. He worried about the maintenance crews, who sometimes failed to do their jobs properly, or who were bribed to look the other way when someone stole water. And yet, despite his practicality, there is a deep love in his writing, a love of the water itself, and of the system that carried it. He understood that the aqueducts were not just engineering, they were civic virtue made concrete. They were the proof that the Romans could work together, could build things that served everyone, could create a city that was healthy and beautiful and just. When he describes the aqueducts, he does so with a kind of reverence, as if he is describing something sacred. And perhaps he was. Perhaps the aqueducts were sacred, in a way that the Romans themselves understood, even if they did not say it in so many words. The gods of springs and rivers were ancient and powerful. The water that flowed through the aqueducts was not just water. It was a gift from the gods, a blessing on the city. The Romans were careful to honor the sources of their aqueducts, to build shrines and altars at the springs, to make offerings and sacrifices. When the Claudia was completed, the Emperor Claudius celebrated with a public ceremony, and the inscription above the arches recorded not only the names of the emperors, but also the names of the springs that fed the aqueduct. The inspector, perhaps, did not think about the gods when he crawled through the channel. He thought about the work, but he may have felt, in his own way, the sacredness of the water. He may have felt it in the coolness of the stone, in the sound of the flow, in the knowledge that he was part of something that made the city glorious. He may have felt it as he walked home, passing the fountains, seeing the water sparkle in the evening light, and knowing that he had helped to bring it there. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps true, about the great engineer Vitruvius, who wrote a treatise on architecture in the 1st century before the Common Era. He describes the construction of aqueducts, the importance of obtaining good water, the tests for water quality, the need to avoid certain springs and pools. He advises the builder to inspect the water by tasting it, by smelling it, by checking its clarity and its temperature. He says that the most reliable way to test a spring is to dig into the ground and observe the water that seeps up. If it is clear, clean, and cold, it is good. If it is muddy or salty or warm, it is bad. This advice is so practical, so simple, so sensible, that it seems almost obvious. But it is also wise in the way that all good practical knowledge is wise. The Romans knew that water was the most important thing a city could have. They knew that without water, there could be no city at all. And they knew that the water had to be good, had to be pure, had to be safe to drink. They did not know about germs or bacteria, of course. They did not understand the science of disease. But they knew that clean water mattered, that it kept people healthy, that it made life possible. And so they built the aqueducts, and they maintained them, and they inspected them. And when the channel narrowed with lime scale, they drained it and cleaned it. And when the walls cracked, they repaired them. And when the roots grew through the joints, they cut them out. And the water flowed, and the city lived, and the empire thrived. Now, let us go back to the inspector one more time. He has reached his home, a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a tenement building, a few rooms above street level, where he lives with his wife and children. He climbs the stairs weary, and his wife is waiting for him. She has a warm meal prepared. She has lit an oil lamp, and the small room is filled with a smoky, golden glow. He tells her, as he eats, about his day. He tells her about the roots, about the pool, about how he cleared them with his knife. He tells her about the size of the lime scale he saw in one section, about the roughness of the stone, about the places where the water was so deep that it rose to his chest. She listens. She has heard all of this before, in different forms, on different days. But she listens because she knows that this is how he unwinds, how he releases the dark, how he makes the transition from the channel to the world above. His children are asleep or listening quietly. The younger one is lying on a mat in the corner, her eyes open, watching the flickering shadows on the wall. The older one is sitting near the lamp, drawing with a piece of charcoal on a scrap of stone. She is drawing, perhaps, the arches of the aqueduct, or the shape of a fountain, or the simple, steady line of water flowing from a pipe. The inspector finishes his meal. He sits back, and he feels the warmth of the food in his stomach, and the warmth of the lamp on his face, and the warmth of his family around him. He is not a man of great ambition or great words. He has not risen in rank. He has not become wealthy. He has not made a name for himself. But he has done his work, day after day, year after year. And his work has kept the water flowing. He closes his eyes for a moment. He can still feel the motion of the crawl, the rhythm of his hands and knees on the stone. He can still hear the water, a soft sound in the back of his mind, like a distant song. He does not try to push it away. He lets it be there. It is part of him now, part of his body, part of his soul. And then the lamp flickers, and he opens his eyes, and he looks at his wife, and he smiles. She smiles back, and he stands, and he walks to the window, and he looks out at the city, dark now, with a million points of light shimmering in the night. The fountains are still running. The water is still flowing. And tonight, he does not need to go down into the channel. Tonight, he can rest. He closes the shutter. He turns from the window. And we will leave him here in the warm, small room with his family, with his meal, with his sleep. We have followed him into the dark, and we have followed him out again. We have crawled through the water channels with him, and we have seen the work with our own eyes, and we have understood, perhaps a little better, what it means to keep a city alive. But we are not quite done yet. There is one more thing we should do before we let the sleep come fully over us. There is one more story to tell. Or perhaps it is the same story told differently. It is the story of the fountains themselves, the public fountains of Rome, the place where all the water, after its long journey from the mountains, finally meets the people. Close your eyes now. Imagine a Roman street, perhaps in the late morning, when the sun is high and the shadows are sharp. The street is busy, filled with people and animals and carts. The buildings are tall, 4 or 5 stories, their facades covered with plaster, painted in bright colors that have faded and peeled in the sun. There is noise everywhere, the calls of vendors, the rumble of wheels, the laughter of children, the murmur of conversation. And in the middle of the street, or at the corner where 2 roads meet, there is a fountain. It is not one of the great monumental fountains, not one of the famous fountains of the emperors, with their marble and their sculpture and their streaming jets. It is a simple fountain, a stone basin, perhaps 2 meters across, with a metal pipe rising from the center, and water spilling from the pipe constantly, endlessly, over the brim and into the basin, and then out through a drain. This fountain is the life of the neighborhood. It is where the women come morning and evening to fill their jugs for cooking and washing. It is where the children come to play, splashing in the basin when they think no one is watching. It is where the muleteers bring their animals to drink, and where the laborers stop to wash the dust from their hands before they go home. The inspector passes by this fountain every day. He knows the people who use it. He knows the woman who comes at dawn, who fills her jug with a practiced motion, without spilling a single drop. He knows the old man who sits on the edge of the basin in the afternoon and watches the passers-by. He knows the children who are always there, always playing, always getting wet. And when he passes, he looks at the fountain, and he sees the water, and he thinks about the channel. He thinks about the dark, the cold, the lime scale, the roots, the debris. He thinks about the work he did, and the work he will do again tomorrow, and the work of all the other inspectors, and the work of all the builders and laborers and engineers who made the whole thing possible. The water spills over the basin and into the drain. It is clean, cold, and pure. It comes from the mountains, from the springs, from the aqueducts. It comes through the channel where the inspector crawls, where he clears away the roots and the mud and the stones. It comes through the castellum where it is measured and distributed. It comes through the pipes, the lead and bronze and clay, through the walls and under the streets. It comes to the fountain, to this basin, to this corner, to this moment. And a woman bends and fills her jug and straightens and smiles and walks away. And the water flows on. Always the water flows on. This is the miracle of the Roman aqueducts, if you want to call it a miracle. Not the arches, though they are beautiful. Not the tunnels, though they are remarkable. Not the engineering, though it was centuries ahead of its time. The miracle is this, that a system of stone and water built in the ancient world could serve so many people for so long, and that it was kept working day after day by the hands and knees and backs of ordinary men. We do not know their names. We do not know their faces. We do not know their stories, but we know their work. We know it in the fountains that still flow, in the ruins of the aqueducts that still stand, in the water that still, in some places, runs through the ancient channels. And we know it in the writings of Frontinus, who preserved their methods and their duties, who described their world, who gave us a window into their lives. If you find yourself in Rome one day and you walk along the remains of the Aqua Claudia and you see the great arches striding across the countryside, you can think of the inspector. You can imagine him below, in the dark, crawling through the water, feeling his way along the stone. You can imagine him climbing out of a shaft, blinking in the sunlight, eating his bread, drinking his wine, walking home. You can imagine him at his table, with his family, with his lamp, with his quiet satisfaction. He is there, even now, in a sense. He is there in the water, in the stone, in the memory of the work. He is there because we are thinking of him, and we are telling his story, and we are remembering the day-long, night-long, year-long labor of the dark. And now the hour is late. The lamp is low. The room is quiet. You are drowsy, and the story has wrapped itself around you, softly, gently, like the water in the channel, moving slowly, always moving, but never hurrying. Let the sound of the water be in your ears. Let the image of the inspector be in your mind. Let the sleep come as it came to him at the end of the day when the work was done and the city was still. Breathe and rest. The water will still be flowing in the morning, but do not sleep yet. There is still a little more, a few more images, a few more thoughts, drifting like leaves on the surface of the stream. Stay with me just a little longer, and we will follow the water to one more place. Let us go far away, out of the city, beyond the hills, beyond the countryside, to the source of the water itself. The spring rises from the ground in a quiet grove of trees. The water is so cold that it burns your hand. It bubbles up from the limestone, from the depths of the earth, carrying with it the minerals that will give Rome some of the best drinking water in the world. The spring is surrounded by a stone basin built by the Romans, lined with smooth plaster. The water fills the basin and overflows, forming a small stream that runs through the grove. There are offerings here sometimes, a coin, a small clay figure, a bunch of flowers. The spring is sacred. The Romans built an altar here, a small stone altar, where travelers and engineers could make a sacrifice before the water began its long journey. The journey of the water is like the life of a person. It begins small, hidden in a place of darkness and coolness. It emerges, it flows, it gains strength and purpose. It travels through the world, passing through places of beauty and places of danger, through the works of human hands, through the quiet and the noise. And eventually, it reaches its destination, and it is used, and it is consumed, and it becomes part of the city, part of the people, part of the great cycle of life. But even the water that is used does not disappear. It drains away into the sewers, into the river, and eventually it will evaporate, and it will become rain, and it will fall on the mountains, and it will seep into the limestone, and it will bubble up again in the same spring, in the same grove, and the journey will begin again. The Romans did not know about this cycle, not in the scientific sense, but they understood it, in a way, intuitively. They knew that water was eternal, that it was always moving, always changing, always the same. They knew that the water they drank had been drunk before by their ancestors, by the gods themselves. And they knew that it would be drunk again by their descendants, long after they were gone. The inspector, too, knew this. He had seen the water in its journey. He had crawled alongside it through the channel, and he had felt its eternal flow. He had felt, perhaps, a sense of his own smallness in the face of that flow, a sense of his own mortality, his own briefness. But he had also felt, perhaps, a sense of comfort. He was part of the water's journey. He was one of its guardians. He was helping to keep the flow alive. And when he died, when his body returned to the earth, the water would still be flowing. And when his name was forgotten, when no one remembered the man who had crawled through the channel, the water would still be flowing. And the work he had done, the roots he had cleared, the debris he had removed, the cracks he had repaired, all of it would be part of the flow, part of the long, continuous story of the water. There is something beautiful in that, something quiet and deep, like the water itself. It is a comfort, perhaps, to think that our work, no matter how small, no matter how obscure, can become part of something that lasts. That the labor of our hands and the strength of our backs and the patience of our spirits can be carried forward like water into a future we will never see. The inspector would not have thought about it in these words, perhaps. He was not a philosopher. He was a worker. He crawled through the dark, and he cleared away the roots, and he came home, and he ate his bread, and he slept. But he knew in his bones, in his aching muscles, in the calluses on his hands. He knew that the work mattered. He knew that the water mattered. He knew that he mattered, not as an individual, but as part of the great, slow, steady flow of human effort. There is a moment, near the end of Frontinus's book, where he describes the annual cleaning of an aqueduct. It is a long process, requiring patience and care. The water must be diverted so that the channel can be drained. The workers must enter, and they must remove the lime scale, the sediment, the debris. The walls must be inspected, the the joints checked, the repairs made. It is exhausting, tedious, difficult work. And when it is done, the water is allowed to flow back, and the aqueduct is tested, and the flow is measured. And only then, when everything is confirmed, is the aqueduct reopened. Frontinus writes about this with the same calm, administrative tone he uses for everything else. He gives the numbers. He describes the process. He notes the results. But there is, just beneath the surface, a sense of wonder. He is amazed, I think, by the sheer scale of the undertaking. He is amazed by the fact that this enormous system, this network of stone and water, is kept working year after year by the coordinated labor of hundreds of people. He is amazed by the fact that it works at all. And perhaps in his long evenings, when he wrote his report by lamplight, he thought about the men who crawled through the channels. He thought about their patience, their courage, their endurance. He thought about the way they descended into the dark, alone, and did the work that needed to be done. And he felt, perhaps, a sense of gratitude, not the kind of gratitude you feel for a great benefactor, but the kind you feel for a quiet colleague, the kind you feel when someone does a difficult job well, without complaint, without drama. He did not know their names. He probably did not know their faces, but he knew their work. He had seen, with his own eyes, the condition of the channels, the places where the roots had grown, the places where the lime scale had narrowed the passage, the places where the water had pooled and backed up. And he had seen the results of their work too. The channels clear, the water flowing, the delivery rates restored. We can imagine, if we like, a moment when Frontinus, after completing an inspection, stood at the mouth of a shaft and watched a worker climb out. The worker is wet, cold, covered in mud. He looks exhausted. He looks, perhaps, as if he might collapse. But he stands up, and he looks at the water, and he nods. And Frontinus, the Roman official, the procurator aquarum, the man who has written so much about the technical details of the aqueducts, does something unexpected. He steps forward, and he claps the worker on the shoulder, and he says, simply, "Good work." We do not know if this ever happened. It is our invention, our little scene, our way of honoring the anonymous ones. But it could have happened. It might have happened. And even if it did not, the sentiment is true. The good work was done. The water flowed. The city lived. And now, truly, the story is almost over. The lamp is nearly out. The sleep has settled over the room, over the city, over the centuries. We have come a long way together, from the dark channel to the bright fountain, from the past to the present, from the water to the sleep. Let us take one last image, then, and let it carry us into rest. The inspector dreams again of the channel. But in this dream, the water is not cold. It is warm, and it glows faintly, a soft blue light, like the light of a summer dawn. He walks through the water, and it does not rise above his knees. The walls of the channel are clear, smooth, free of lime scale and roots. The roof is high above his head, and there is light coming from somewhere, though he cannot see the source. He walks, and he is not tired. He walks, and he is not afraid. He walks, and he can hear in the distance the sound of a fountain splashing merrily. He follows the sound, and the channel opens up, and he is standing in a vast, bright plaza, and there is a fountain at the center, taller than a house, cascading with water, sparkling in the sun. There are people all around, laughing, talking, filling their jugs, splashing their faces. The water is everywhere, in the air, in the light, in the sound. He stands and he smiles, and then he wakes, and it is morning, and the sun is streaming through the window, and his wife is calling him to come and eat, and the city is stirring below, and the water is flowing as it always does, as it always will. He rises, he dresses, he eats, he walks to the shaft, he descends again into the dark. The water is cold, the channel is narrow, the work is hard, but he is not afraid. He is part of something larger. He is the guardian of the flow, and the flow goes on, and the flow goes on. It goes on through the morning light, when the sun touches the rooftops of Rome and turns the tiles to gold. It goes on through the heat of the afternoon, when the shadows shorten and the streets grow quiet. It goes on through the evening, when the lamps are lit and the voices of the city soften to a murmur. And it goes on through the night, when the moon rides high over the hills, and the only sound is the gentle, ceaseless whisper of water moving through stone. You might think, lying here in the dark, that this is a story about the past. You might think it is about a time that is gone, a city that has crumbled, a people who have long since turned to dust. And it is, in part. But it is also, perhaps, a story about the present, because the water still flows. Some of those ancient channels, repaired and rebuilt, renewed and restored, still carry water to the city that stands where Rome once stood. The aqueducts, in their quiet, stubborn way, have outlasted the empire that built them. They have outlasted the emperors, the generals, the poets, the slaves. They have outlasted the very language that named them. And still, the water flows. There is a strange comfort in this, a deep, quiet comfort. The thought that some things endure, that a channel cut into a hillside, lined with stone, covered with a roof, can survive the fall of civilizations. That water, which seems so soft, so yielding, can carve through rock and shape the course of human history. That the small, steady work of unknown hands can echo through 2,000 years. Think of the inspector one more time. He is walking home, perhaps. The work is done for the day. His legs are tired. His hands are scratched. His hair is damp from the water that dripped from the roof of the channel. He climbs the steps of his house, and he pushes open the door, and he is met by the smell of bread, the sound of his children laughing, the warmth of the hearth. He sits down. He eats. He tells no one about the roots he pulled, the cracks he sealed, the long hours he spent in the dark. It is not a secret. It is simply not a story. It is just what he does. And yet, what he does matters. It mattered to the people of Rome, who woke each morning to the sound of water splashing in the public fountains. It mattered to the bakers, who mixed their dough with clean water. It mattered to the physicians, who knew that clean water meant fewer fevers. It mattered to the mothers, who bathed their children in the public baths. It mattered to all of them, though none of them knew his name. He is not a hero. He is not a great man. He is not remembered in any book, except, perhaps, as a number, a statistic, a mention in a report. But he is there in the stone, in the water, in the long continuity of human effort. He is there in the quiet hours when the city sleeps and the water does not. And perhaps that is the true story, not the grand story of Rome with its triumphs and its tragedies, its Caesars and its conquests, but the small story, the story of the one who crawls through the dark, who does the work that no one sees, who keeps the water flowing. The story that is told in every generation, in every place, in every human endeavor. The story of the ones who hold the world together, not with glory, not with power, but with patience and persistence, and the simple, stubborn refusal to stop. We are all, in our own way, inspectors. We all crawl through our own channels, our own dark passages, our own narrow places of doubt and difficulty. We all clear away the roots and the debris. We all do the work that no one sees, the work that keeps things flowing, the work that holds things together. And we do it mostly without recognition, without applause, without even the knowledge that anyone notices. But the water notices, the flow notices, the great, slow, steady movement of life notices. And in the end, that is enough. Let us think now of the water itself, not the aqueduct, not the channel, not the inspector, just the water. The water that fell as rain on the Apennines, that seeped into the earth, that emerged from the springs, that was gathered and guided and carried across the plains. The water that ran through the lead pipes and the bronze valves, that rose in the fountains, that filled the baths, that quenched the thirst of a city of 1,000,000 people. The water that has been moving in one form or another since the beginning of time. It is a strange thing to think about, isn't it, in the quiet of the night, that the water you drink, the water you wash with, the water that falls from the sky, has been here forever. It was here before the Romans. It was here before the Etruscans. It was here before the first human being looked up at the sky and wondered. It was here when the mountains were young and the seas were new. And it will be here long after we are gone. The water does not care about our names. It does not care about our empires, our achievements, our glories. It does not care about our sorrows or our joys. It simply flows. It moves from the high places to the low places. It seeks its own level. It follows the path of least resistance. It is patient, and it is persistent, and it is eternal. And yet, perhaps, the water is not indifferent. Perhaps, in its way, it remembers. It remembers the hands that built the channels. It remembers the feet that walked through the tunnels. It remembers the breath of the inspector, the warmth of his body, the dim light of his lantern as he passed through the dark. The water has a memory, even if it does not have a mind. It remembers the journey it has taken, the places it has seen, the people it has served. And when the water reaches the fountain, and it splashes into the air, and it sparkles in the sun, and a child dips a cup into the basin and drinks, the water carries with it, silently, invisibly, the memory of all that has come before. It carries the memory of the mountains, the springs, the channels, the inspector. It carries the memory of Rome. And the child, of course, knows nothing of this. The child just drinks. The child just tastes the cool, clean water. The child just laughs and runs away, and the water continues its journey down through the drains, into the earth, back to the springs, back to the beginning. There is a circle there, a circle that the Romans dimly sensed, though they could not articulate it. A circle that we, with all our science, can describe but not fully explain. A circle that is, perhaps, the deepest truth of all. That everything returns, that nothing is ever lost, that the water that was here at the beginning will be here at the end. And so, as we lie here in the dark, as the night deepens and the city grows quiet, let us be at peace. Let us think of the water flowing through its ancient channels. Let us think of the inspector resting in his home. Let us think of the long continuity of things, the great, slow, steady movement of time, the quiet persistence of the world. Let us close our eyes. Let us breathe. Let us feel the weight of our blankets, the softness of our pillows, the gentle rhythm of our own hearts. And let us know that we too are part of the flow, that we too are carried, that we too will return in our own time to the source. The lamp has gone out. The room is dark. The only sound is the sound of breathing, slow and even, and the faint, distant whisper of water, moving through stone, moving through time, moving through the long, peaceful night. Sleep now, sleep, as the city slept, as the inspector slept, as the water slept in its channels, dreaming its ancient dream. Sleep and let the flow carry you. There is nothing to fear. There is nothing to hurry. There is nothing to do tonight but rest. And in the morning, the water will still be flowing, and the work will still be there, and the world will continue as it always has, as it always will. Good night, then. Good night, and sleep well.